Hi everyone, thank you for tuning in. My name is Chris Knight. I am a portrait and commercial photographer based here in New York City. And today I'm going to be doing a live demonstration about controlling light in small spaces. As much as I love kind of shooting in environments and working in big studios, oftentimes we are saddled with the unique challenge of shooting in relatively small spaces. And so I'm going to take a relatively kind of masochistic approach here and create a very confined space for me right out of the gate to show you some different tricks and tips you can use to kind of control light in that very, very restricted space. I would like to say a big thank you to Fujifilm for having me out here today, for Adorama, and Profoto for bringing me some gear to play around with. Very lucky to be having some help from both of them on today's broadcast. So I will also say, for those of you that are here and those of you watching the chat live, I'm very, very used to taking questions as I go. So if anybody happens to have a question they'd like a little bit more thought on, or hey, why did you do this, whatever, just give me one of these and I will try to take care of you in time. My model today is Chris. That makes it very easy for both of us. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump right into this and take you through what this process might look like. I am also going to make it a little difficult for myself at first, just to kind of illustrate some points by putting up some V-flats. I will not leave them up the whole time once you see that it doesn't really matter once we're able to shape it, so I can kind of take it down and make your lives a little bit easier so that you guys aren't totally blocked from what I'm doing. So when they do go up, please don't worry, it won't be there the whole time. So what we have here is a mid-gray background. I wanted to keep something relatively light-toned to show you how transformative it can be just through the use of light. Chris is also wearing a relatively dark sweater, and I wanted to show you how we can create that separation as well in this small space to really shape the light in the most dramatic way possible. The camera that I'm using today is the Fujifilm 100S camera, which is usually my regular workhorse. Currently I have the 55mm lens on it, the 1.8, but I possibly, depending upon how things go, might switch over to the 80mm. For those of you translating that to full frame, the 55 roughly translates to around a 42, 43 millimeter on a full frame, the 80 being around a 72 or so. So rough equivalencies. It's a little bit wide for maybe a traditional portrait, but I happen to really like the character of it up close, and we'll kind of see how that plays out. I'm going to be tethering into the computer. I'm using Capture One here so that we can see this live and get it as close as we can in camera. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and set this up just to make things as challenging as I can for myself. I've got two V-flats here, and the first one, oops, we're just going to set it to the white side because maybe you're working in a home studio, or maybe you're shoved inside a little closet at a space where you're just given an incredibly small room and you struggle to really control the light. So I'm going to put up two white walls on the side to show you how difficult this can be to deal with. I also have Chris relatively close to the background. He's, you know, you're fine. Good. I would say he's probably like 1.5 feet, 2 feet off the background. And I'm going to show you what we can do with this, how little differences can make a big change in the image, and what we can kind of do in this space. Okay, so my camera settings currently, I'm going to be shooting at a relatively low ISO just for the cleanliness of the image. At an ISO 100, I'm going to be doing a shutter speed of 1/125th, which is the sync speed of my camera, not kicking it into any weird high-speed sync things or anything like that. And then I'm going to probably guess and say my aperture is going to be somewhere in the 5.6 range, just as a baseline. And I'm going to start by grabbing one of these lights, which is the Profoto B10X. And I am definitely not going to be using all of this power. It's a 500 watt strobe. I'm going to be keeping it relatively low. 3A. And what we're going to do is kick that modeling light on. And I'm going to throw on a 3-foot OCF octabox, just something that gives me a little bit of soft light. Now, one of the things that I see people struggle with right out of the gate, oftentimes, is that when they have a modifier, they end up leaving it a little too far away. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by showing you when we just put this decently far away. I'm going to use my trusty meter to give me about a 5/6 just to see where we're at with it. Okay, so I'm reading 5/6 and a third, so I'm going to set it to 5/6.
The dome of the meter, you're pointed towards the light, or you're pointing it towards the dome of the meter? You're pointing towards the light, or you're pointing it?
The dome of the meter, I am pointing toward the light.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. And I'm overexposing it by about a third, which is going to give me a little punch to the skin. So, just so that you can see how flat everything is here. ND. Sorry, what was that? What? Say that one more time. I'm sorry. If it didn't read 5/6 from the meter, what would I adjust? Well, if it was reading 4, for example, I'd turn it up a stop. I would turn the light up a stop. Yes. So currently, it's very flat. Thank you. I'm going to put this to my daylight balance. The thing is there's a little bit of softness to the light, but the light is not that far off in power from him and the background, right? So when it comes to a meter, there are kind of a couple ways you can use it. One, you can use it to tell your camera what power it needs to be, or what aperture it needs to be, or what power your light is. But I actually like it for reading the scene, or if I'm using multiple lights, how they relate to each other. And so if I were to read the scene right at Chris's face, which is where I'm basing the exposure, I'm getting that 5/6/3. But if I read the back wall here, it's reading about a stop less. It's reading 4. So it's not really that much darker than it would be if it were perfectly exposed, which is why it appears pretty bright. Now, the way light fundamentally works in terms of quality is that the closer the light source is relative to your subject, the softer it will be. The larger it will appear, the softer it will be, right? The further away it is to your subject, the relatively harder it will be. Now, this is a softbox. It's not really going to be soft, but the shape of the light, the way it forms those shadows, has a little bit more definition to it because it's relatively further away. But if I move it in closer, it will become a relatively larger light source to the subject, creating a softer quality of light. But there are kind of a couple things at play here. The quality is definitely changing, but it is also changing the brightness, right? So it's going to be a brighter light unless I adjust for it because it's coming in closer. But it's also affecting the difference between the exposed area and the shadow. And so this is where we start to get into something called the inverse square law. And without getting too deep into the weeds on it, we'll treat it a little bit more practically. When it goes really close to your subject, the shadows become much darker. You get more of a fall off between what is really close to the light and the background. So here at the moment, right, Chris in the background, compared to the light source, they're closer together. But if I move that light source in closer to Chris, relatively, the background isn't as close to him. So what'll happen when I bring this in really, really close is, yes, the light does get softer, and there is a lot of light bouncing around in here. Meter this really quick. So it's reading 11.2, so just over f11. It added about 2 stops of light. Now here's the thing, and this is where inverse square law gets a little bit fun. If I were to change the exposure here from 5.6 to 11, you'll notice that it'll be properly exposed, but the shadows will get a little bit darker, and the background won't be totally dark, but it will be darker. Okay? It's a little bit darker. See that? Just a little bit. Because it's relatively a different distance. But if I were to bring this down to 5.6, it's not going to be that noticeably different. If I went back to the original exposure, so I'm just going to bring this down 2 stops. Great. The idea here is that it's not really, see that? It's not really about the aperture changing as much, although you will get a little bit with ambient light. But here, the ambient light isn't really doing that much. It's still dark in the shadow area, right? Just by bringing it in closer. So the closer you bring the light, the darker the shadows will be. But I can control this even more. Easiest way to do this is by feathering it off the background. So instead of pointing the light directly at your subject, instead what we're going to do is we're going to angle it a bit off. Now the issue here is, I'm getting a little less light on the background. You can kind of see, especially on the left-hand side, how it's starting to get a little bit darker. See, we're changing the shape of it a little bit. But let's say we wanted to control it even more. We have a grid, yes? Cliff? We have a grid for the 3 foot?
I do not.
No, okay. No grid. Okay, no grid, it's fine. A grid can be one of the solutions, but we can also bring everything off the background a little bit, and we can make that background go even further away. So I'm going to scoot you up just about a foot, not even a whole bunch. A little bit more, a little bit more. Great. We'll bring everything off just a little bit more. Great. Cool. Maybe turn your face just a little bit. That's great. And you can see how much darker that background has gotten. And I mean, he moved a foot. But look at how beautiful that fall off of light is now. Now this kind of light is, like, this is flattened out. There's nothing done to it, right? But if we think of like the old classic Irving Penn window portraits where he would kind of create that gradient of light across the background, you can kind of see how it's dark over here and light over here. We call this checkerboarding the light, where it basically makes one light go in 2 different directions. So the light on Chris is going left to right, whereas the background is going dark to bright, and it kind of creates this effect. And when you crank the contrast up a little bit, I'll get a little bit here, you start to kind of see how it's doing that really beautiful effect. Now also here, something to note, that the right side of his face has a lot of lift to the shadows, which I actually don't like. I think it works here in this image. But the challenge is that if you don't want that, how do we control it, right? There's a couple of different ways we can do it. In a space like this, if you happen to have V-flats or collapsible V-flats like this, use the black side, right? This is doing nothing right now, just as a heads up. So let's say I took a V-flat with me and I just used the black side of it to block that light from bouncing around. You can actually, even if you're standing over here, you could see that it just cut every bit that was bouncing there on the side of the face. Again, I'm not saying this is the right call, because I like what's going on here, but watch the difference. Head down just a little bit for me. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, that's perfect. Great. And so you'll see a much darker side of the face. And you see it even darker on the left side of the image because less light is bouncing around in that space.
It's a question that Chad asking what the ratio of the background is now.
You mean the light?
I guess they want a reading off the background
Yeah,
itself.
so it's not going to be consistent across the background, but I am at 5.6 on my key. The background here is reading 1.4, and over here it's reading 2. So it's, you know, it's a 2.5, 3-stop difference, depending upon where you're at, just by moving him forward a little bit and angling and moving this light just a hair, right? So I probably would open it up just a little bit. I would want maybe a little bit more light on the background, I think. It's great. It just opens it up a little bit. See that? Just a little bit more. And that kind of gives you more of that Irving Penn kind of look. On the background, I just went from about here to here. Can you actually, Seth, can you flip the overhead lights off really, really quick? Can we see if the modeling lights will work? Just really, really quick. So I basically went from here to there, just a little bit of a twist. Cool? Now what you can also do in these situations, like if this is a home studio, hanging up black fabric can work. Even gaff taping black fabric to the wall can work. Black paper can work. The V-flats work well. The back of one of these works in a pinch. We also regularly use flags, like even something like a 24 by 36. Anything like that is great at cutting light, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this white back, because I actually liked what that looked like. And I'm going to take one quick shot here. Cool. Great. And turn your face just a little. Perfect. Let's make sure this looks good. I think it looks great. And then I want you to kind of maybe bring one hand up. Yeah, that's nice. That's great. And then just your eyes look at me. And then just your eyes look off that way. Great. And then just look up at me with the eyes. And so it's a very flexible light. You can kind of move around with it a little bit. And I think this looks really beautiful. Yes?
Did you get the images black and white from Capture One?
Yeah, I've not even done a complicated treatment here. I literally just pulled the saturation out of it. That was it. Sorry? Sorry. He had asked if I had done a black and white conversion in Capture One. It's very, very not refined here. The trick that I oftentimes do with these sorts of images is I give it a little pop of exposure and then contrast. But because you're working with a very flat light here, it can handle that contrast a little bit more, I think, more interestingly. So like this, and then just give it a little bit of a pump. And then you start to get something that looks like that. Okay? So this, I think, creates like a really beautiful, simple portrait, not a whole lot of anything, really. It's just one really simple light. I think it works really beautifully. Now, with the darker clothes and everything, you might find that you want a little bit more definition to various things. So can you bring that hand up one more time for me, please? Yep, no, the hand, just the hand back up, yep. And just kind of how you had it before was really nice, just kind of leaning into it, yep. And then Cliff, could you do me a favor? Could you hold that for me really, really quick, just like right underneath?
Gotcha.
Perfect. And so that little extra help sometimes can be nice at just bringing a little bit of detail kind of in some of those other areas. And then maybe can you bring it over on this side over here, just so we can kind of see what happens if we, oh, careful.
Oops, sorry. Here?
Maybe bring it around a little bit. There we go, that's great.
Okay.
What's that? The connection?
I got you.
Yep, okay. Great. And because that left side is getting a little bit dark, bringing that reflector really, really close can give you just a little bit of lightening to some of those areas, right? I think that can look really cool. Okay. Yeah, it's great, thank you. So the point here is that I'm able to take what is a relatively nondescript background, and honestly, even as a white background, this can work really well. Actually, one more time, could you hold that for me just behind him really quick, just so I can kind of show the white background? White wall, ready? Back up just maybe a bit. Just, no, yeah, perfect. And so even if this were a white background, you can kind of see how tonally it still works. It still translates, right? And that's a reflector, you know. So, cool. All right, any questions so far? How are we doing out there? Yes? Mm-hmm. So with this particular modifier, is there an inner baffle, Cliff? So he was asking, do we have a hot spot in this? It's got a double baffle, so there is an inner baffle and the exterior. It's pretty even light, honestly. It'll be probably a skosh brighter if you were to measure it, I would guess, in the middle. When I started to feather it, especially as you feather anything, you're gonna start to lose a little bit of light on that edge. And yeah, it's even, it's nice. It's really nice. It's not as susceptible to something like a beauty dish. Anybody else out there? Yes. I just was doing it as a black and white. Yeah. Oh. Thanks. But if I did put this in color, I think it works. Looks great.
Does this work with a flash also?
Sorry?
A flash, if you use the flash as well instead of a strobe?
Is this for a speed light?
Oh, you mean for a speed light versus a strobe? Yeah, it would work the same. The speed light strobe absolutely would work the same in these instances. Yeah.
Beauty dish?
Yeah. So something that does, you know, people love a beauty dish. This is a silver beauty dish, so it's got a little bit more of a reflective quality to it. You'll see more specularity on the skin picking up. I would probably say my personal preference is I like a white beauty dish for more of a, I don't know, it's like I find that it's a more even tonality across it. I'm going to put this on in just a second. That's fine. But you know, it's got a good punch to it. You might use something like this for like athletes or something. So there is a plate on this, especially when dealing with the flathead modifiers. You can kind of see that it bleeds out a little bit, and you see it on the background here as well. So what I've got here is the plate pointed at Chris's face. So otherwise, it's going to give me kind of that unevenness, and you'll definitely see the hot spot from the side. So you can kind of see it kind of rake across this. It can be interesting, but you know, I'll show you both. It just depends on how creatively you want to use it. All right, so I'm going to just get a little look at this. Like, you can get cool results with it, but it's not probably how I would say it's intentionally meant to be used. Cool, maybe turn just a little bit that way. Great. And what I've kind of done is created almost like an irregular light across the face, but it actually does look pretty. It's just not really, because it's kind of uneven, but it can be interesting. Whereas if we used it kind of as it was intended, you can kind of see it's going to end up in a flatter version of that light. And what we're going to get is 5.6. Great. And it is very nice light. It's just, you can kind of see that it's now, especially with the angle, pointed everywhere, right? What I regularly like to use with a lot of my modifiers is I love a grid. And they really, really are extraordinarily invaluable. Here, really nice light on the face, on the background. It's fine, and if there were enough space, I could pull that background way far back, and I really wouldn't worry about it. And that's fine, but we don't always have that opportunity. And so I really do love the grid for the soft light reflector for the beauty dish. This is a 25-degree grid, and it will do a great job at restricting the light down. So it's these little kind of honeycomb patterns across, and it makes the spread of light go from, you know, here to here. It's not going to change the quality of light. It's not going to make it softer or harder. It's just going to kind of restrict where it goes. We slide this right in here. Cool. And so just by doing this, you'll lose a little bit of light. Let's see how much. So we were at 5.6 before. We lost about 1/3 of a stop. So not a huge amount, but enough to compensate for. I'll turn it up 1/3. And you'll see a huge difference on the background. Look at that. Huge difference on the background just by adding the grid, which gives you a whole lot more control in this confined space. And I didn't have to turn it. I didn't have to feather it. Yes, you can do that. That's a thing that you can do in the pinch, but it really just puts that tight pocket of light really on his face, right? I mean, this goes to almost total blackness here, right, behind him, which I think works really nicely. Cool. Now, you can do a lot with this. This is very frontal, but let's say we want to do something a little bit more creative. Maybe turn your face this way for me, please. Great. And turn back just a little bit. Perfect. That's great. Yeah, that's great. And so I can actually, instead of putting him in a more frontal broad light, I can put it a little bit more behind. This is going to put even less light on the background, but it's going to end up creating this really beautiful, let's see, profile.
Nice.
Right? And it fades completely to darkness outside of that light really, really effortlessly. Right? So, what can we do with this? I think this is a really beautiful base, right? And there's a lot you can do with this. If you think of like maybe the old Karsh portraits where it'd be that profile and the hands kind of come up, you can create some really beautiful shapes out of this. Kind of bring it, maybe cross the hands a little bit, just like just kind of like this maybe, and then look like this, and lift the head up a little. Yep, great. Down a little bit. Good, perfect. And then just your eyes a little lower for me. There you go, nice. And then bring the chin down a little bit for me. A little bit more. Great. And so what we'll have is something like this, which is nice. Gives you a nice sculptural shape that draws attention to the hands. But again, all the darkness, even on the light background, and the B flat behind him, it fades to dark really quickly. So what do we do? Well, there's a couple of options here. We can put a light on the background. We can use a rim light. We can use both. We can also add a fill to the foreground as well. So we're going to play around with what some of those options look like to show you the flexibility of what this can become. One light we can get nice results with. But when you start to add a few more into it, you can get a lot more variety. Do you have a question?
Question in the chat, basically asking, does adding a grid just make it slightly harder of a light?
The grid will not change the quality of light. What it will change is the spread of the light. So this being a relatively soft light source, it's a silver beauty dish, so it's got a little bit of a punch and specularity to it. Won't change those characteristics. You'll lose about a little bit of power from it, but it will keep the quality the same. It just won't go as far out into the scene. Same with the softbox. We call those egg crates as well, if you'll hear that term used interchangeably. A grid on a softbox will help restrict the light. I'm going to show you what that looks like when we put a softbox on here in just a second. And then you can also use grids for harder modifiers or lack of modifiers, and it'll do the same thing. It'll keep that hard quality of light, but it'll just restrict where the light goes. I'm going to show you that in addition. So, excuse me, I'm going to sneak right behind you. I'm going to put a strip softbox right over here. And we're, again, pretending like we're in this very small room. Now, what I probably would like to do in a situation like this is I would probably use like a 1x3 strip, only because I'm not shooting full body and I'm in a relatively small space. But we're going to use 1x4s today. Okay?
Gotcha.
Thank you. Put this on C. Okay. I'm putting this on group C, just so that I can control it separately. Generally, my personal, if I'm working in studio and I'm working in a very kind of structured flow of things, I usually like to put my key, my main light on A. I'll usually do my fill light on B, and I usually like to do a rim light on C and a background on D. It's just usually kind of how my brain works, and then I know what I'm targeting to specifically adjust those things. This is not a small modifier. And unfortunately, it's going to create its own issues when it's this close and not controlled. So I'm going to take this, squeeze it on there. Sorry. Let's turn it down a bit. Maybe get a little bit out of here, just to give me a little bit of an angle, just so it's not hitting you in the back. I'm just trying to make it a little better. Okay, that's fine. So let's say I want to start where it's at exposure of the scene. Okay, so I'm at 5.6. I'm going to make this read 5.6. And this is where we get into reading lights in relation to relatively even, right? But let's say you don't want that. Let's say you want it to be more subtle. I can take that power and I can turn it down, let's say 2 stops. Okay? And I can create something much more subtle. I think that's probably too subtle. Let me turn that up about a half a stop. Now, the other challenge when using a softbox this close and in this kind of space is that oftentimes, especially as you start to rotate, and if it's even brighter, you'll actually get these flares at cameras, which will kind of throw off your contrast. And I also regularly like to use certain lens filters as well that flare lights even more. And in these sorts of situations, as nice as they are on skin, they can catch these lights in a way that isn't always what you want. So, in this situation, what I would do is throw a grid on this. Again, you'll lose a little bit of light, thank you. But, so we can lower it down a little bit. Sorry.
While he's doing that, you guys in the chat, there's like 115 of you and 50 likes. I don't know what your problem is, but you could hit like for the guy he's sweating over here. Look at him struggle with this grid. Look at him.
Wow.
Give him a bunch of likes. And hit like for Cliff, too. He only has so much longer
give
to
Cliff
get
some
likes,
attention.
you know?
Give Cliff some love.
Everyone clap for Cliff in the room.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Community.
Thank you. So So usually what I will do if I'm using strips is I regularly like to use a grid just because it gives me a little bit more control. It's almost always what my go-to is. Okay, you want to hop in for me, please? Great. Thank you. And you will lose a little bit of light, but cool. See, lost a little bit, but I'm going to pump that up just a hair. That's good. You can leave your head up. Perfect. Yep, just a little bit, just so we can kind of get a sense of it. Beautiful. Okay, it's just that really subtle lift back there. Just kind of carves out the shape. Now, I'm a big fan of a very, very subtle rim light, but if you like a more aggressive version of this, you just make it brighter, right? That's just very, very easy solution. Another thing that you can do here, if you want to keep that very contrasty look, is we can throw a light on the background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this low stand here. And I'm going to create a little bit of contrast behind him. So by brightening it up, similar to what we're doing with that checkerboard light earlier, but I'm kind of doing this through a light, right? This gives you a little bit more control, lets you decide how bright you want those to be, but also to place the light exactly where you want it to be. For this, what's this? Just a light. I'll take a light.
Would a half-stop road rag work as well as a grid?
Would a half-stop road what?
It's
Road rag?
It's a flag system.
Oh, sure. I've not used that particular flag system.
Yeah, it's just portable, very portable.
Okay, yeah. I mean, flags I would use to control light, to shape light kind of from going in different directions. Flag kits especially also give you the extra fabric, so they give you silks and nets. And so if you want to darken something down, you can use a net, but I think it's probably more likely to use it with like an older continuous light versus a strobe, because you can easily dial it up and down.
It'll cut light, but you're talking about spread of light is two different things. I think.
I mean, there's different tools that we use to control spread. I regularly like to use barn doors as well, where you can actually kind of put flaps on the sides and shape the light. But grids are just going to keep that round shape. You can also use cinefoil to kind of wrap around, create your irregularly configured thing, can also be fine. Totally a matter of personal taste. What I'm going to do on this background here is throw a light with nothing on it first, and then I'm going to throw a grid on it to show you what a grid on a hard light will do. So currently is going to be pretty bright. I also find that having a modeling light on when you do this can be very, very helpful. Sure. Okay. So there's that. It's fine. Like, especially in this tight of a space, it's fine. It's going, you know, all over, but it's fine. And you can change the power of it. You can, you know, do what you want with it, but it's fine. Okay. But let's say you want something tighter, more constricted. So this is I think it's a 20. I think it's a 20-degree grid. 20-degree grid for the hard light modifiers. This is going to give me a very tight beam of light. So let me move it just a little bit. Great. Very, very tightly controlled beam of light. I think I'm probably going to back it up just a little bit. You can also, in a pinch, you don't have to necessarily put it behind your subject. You can put it to the side to help it spread out just a little bit more. right? Something like this, totally fine. Lovely. Right? But do you see how subtle it is back there? Watch the difference in this exact same spot. Huge difference with one of these. I love the little tiny pockets of light here. And I use these all the time. I'm just gonna give myself just a little bit of something over there, a little bit more space. Cool. It's super subtle, but it's basically I'm creating the shape of light behind him in a very, very slight way. Look at the difference between this and this. He's not lost. As dark as it is, you don't lose his form, right? Now, I'm going to add one more thing to this. I'm going to add a fill light, okay? And I'm just going to lighten up the shadows a little bit from the front. So I'll take this over here. And I'm going to show you a couple of different ways you can use this. I'm gonna break everything before I leave.
Sorry, it's my house. You can break it.
Nothing yet. Thanks. What's this a B? Okay. So here's the thing. You can use a big soft umbrella as a fill. I do this all the time. I'll just take an umbrella here and lighten the shadows in the softest way I possibly can. And sometimes I want to give a little bit of a lift to the shadows. But if you don't have an umbrella handy, and I do this all the time, all I'm going to do is turn it around and bounce it off the wall behind me. Just lighten everything, okay? So what am I aiming for here? Well, what I want is something that's going to lighten the shadows a little bit. Just by the feel, if you want. If you're a mathematical person and you like to meter and you're looking for an actual measurement, I would probably say that I usually gravitate toward about 2 to 3 stops underneath my key. So if I'm looking here at a 5.6 as my key, I'm probably going to end up somewhere around 2 to 2.8 in that ballpark of what I want my fill to meter as, if you are looking for an actual measurement on that. So to kind of turn everything off, okay, and I'm going to only turn my fill light on separately to meter that separately. That's not firing. It's triggering, but it's not firing. That head's not firing. Do you have another head?
I do not.
See? Not firing.
It's weird.
Yeah,
I may have bounced it a ton.
He gave it a Cliff special.
that'll do.
Oh, I have another head. I have
Do you?
something. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So basically what I'm looking for is I'm looking for about a 2.5 stop difference between the two.
Question in the chat is, could you use an optical spot for that background light to create the same effect?
You absolutely could use an optical spot to create a tiny control beam of light for something like this. Very, very effective at that. That's going to give you a hard light, which is what this is, and then you can move it in and out. It absolutely would work.
Channel 3?
Yes, please. 3B.
Okay. It's only
That's fine.
2. I must have
Listen, you could also use a strip if you want a soft light from below, which is fine. But I'm just going to show you, even bouncing it off all of this, dark material, black, blue, it can work really well.
So someone in the chat's asking if your fill light is 2 to 3 stops lower than your key.
That's what I'm aiming for, yeah. So it is very, very dark in here. I'm bouncing off black. I am. I'm hitting at full power on this.
Do you want to move that V flat over
Just we'll just illustrate a point here, just to kind of show what's happening. Currently, this is just the fill light. Right? It's very, very subtle, and you can see the modeling lights on and the other things. I think maybe D didn't kick off, but let's turn A back on, this back on, and we should be better now. This is everything on. So it's very, very subtle. It's probably not enough, but it is a little more silvery in those shadowy areas. But let's say you do happen to have a white wall back here, you will notice a difference. Oh, thank you. Watch the difference. In terms of power, it'll lighten up a lot. I know, right? Significantly more.
Cliff dome, cliff light.
Okay. Did I lose that? Oh, did I lose the battery on it?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. All right, it's fine.
Batteries.
It's fine. All good. Great. Which looks really nice.
I'm gonna change this out for you.
Okay. But it is lightening everything, so you see the background has gotten brighter, not just him.
Nope.
You just lose the power.
I got it. You want a battery? I got a battery.
I forgot it. Just, I didn't charge my own lights. You laughing at me, man?
I love you so much, Cliff.
Right
There we
back
go.
at you. It happens when you get old. You'll see. You'll see that.
Listen, for being like 120, you're kicking it, man. You're doing great. Sharp as a tack.
Cool. That's fine. All good. All good. Okay. So I have this really beautiful light now. I turned the fill light down just a skosh because I like it a little darker, but that kind of gives you that really beautiful light. Now, it also doesn't have to be soft. You can use a hard light if you want. That kind of gives you kind of its own unique characteristics, especially if you're a fan of like harsh, right? So I can kind of take this. Now, what it is going to do here is give me a hard light on the background. So that's not what I want. What I'm going to do is give myself a little bit of an angle down. Bring it down this way a little bit. Just a little bit more. And I'll add a grid to it as well, just to give myself a little bit more shape and control. I got a grid here? No? This will do. You got it? This will work.
There it is.
Yep. I don't think so. So currently, it's going to be pretty bright. Well, you might even see a background light. See some shadows in the back. But if I took this grid, I gave myself a little bit of a more restrictive light. My hope is you start to see kind of the power of grids in particular. and how restricting that light can be hugely helpful. Got a little bit of a shadow. Let's try that. Beautiful, that's great. We'll turn it up just a little. Maybe a little bit more. So, you know, I do regularly light, that's too much, with a meter, but I also will light by feel all the time. And so this is a hard fill, but it creates kind of that silvery metallic look to it, which I really like. Gives you a little bit more punch and specularity to the shadows. And when you look here compared to here, right? It's also a little bit brighter, but it is a little bit more silvery. And it kind of gives you that harder shadow, which you can kind of see there, which I don't hate.
A couple questions in the chat. So the first one is, if I'm understanding this question right, because of compression on social media sites, the background lights that you're using can have banding. Any tips to mitigate that?
What do you mean they're banding?
Well, I think because you have gradation on a gray paper, some people, when they put it onto Instagram, it'll have like a banding effect.
Oh, 16-bit.
There you go.
Shoot in 16-bit. That usually mitigates that issue. And then don't push the file too much because you are most susceptible to banding when you are making big changes to areas of very subtle tonal differences. So clean backgrounds that have subtle gradations of light are always going to be more susceptible to banding when you push that file quite a bit. 16 bits will retain that information better, but if I took this file and I made an 8-bit image out of it and I tried to put a strong adjustment in Photoshop, not in RAW, you will definitely get banding pretty quickly.
And the other one is, someone feels that the highlights on his face are blown out. Would you take that down?
It's definitely brighter on the TV than it is in my computer, but you can. I mean,
it's also part of that silvery look he's talking about.
Yeah.
It's a choice. It's a creative choice.
Theirs is a little more subtle if you want that. So I'm gonna take that. I'm gonna turn my background up just a skosh. I think this light looks really beautiful. And then I'm going to just look down, just look at your eyes just a little bit, head up just a little bit, and then just your eyes down. Nice. Good. Tilt the top of your head to me just a little. Yep, perfect. And then turn your face to me just a little bit. And then lift up just a little. And just your eyes at me.
And what autofocus modes are you in?
I'm in single shot right now, but I do regularly alternate between single shot and continuous on the face. Can you bring the hands up a little closer to the face for me? And just kind of keep your face a little bit more that way. Yeah, perfect. And just yeah, it's great. Good. And then tilt the head away from me. That's perfect. Yep, nice. Switch hands for me. That's great. And then tilt the top to me just a little. Perfect. That's great. And turn your face that way just a little more.
If you don't have a fourth light, what would you use as a fill light?
You could use a reflector. Absolutely would work. Yeah, I mean, this is beautiful. So what we've got here is a lot of subtlety, kind of just putting the light in a very, very specific place. I think my one critique for myself is I want to get this a little bit further back just so it's not in my shot. Also using I will say that using a longer focal length won't make you as susceptible to it because I am shooting a little wide, which gives you those kind of fun distortion, a little bit of character to it. It's just making my life a little bit harder. So let me do the same thing. Give me that hand right up again. Yep, good. And then maybe here. And then lift this way a little bit and come off the hand just a little. It's almost like it's there, but you're not resting on it. And turn your face that way just a little bit. Perfect, that's great. And then maybe drop this shoulder for me. And lift up a little more. I know there's no posing table. You may put the hand underneath. There you go, that's great, that's great. Excellent.
And while he's going at it, you guys can hit like in that chat. Now there's like double
Eyes
you
right at
than
me.
there are likes. So help the guy out. Chris needs to eat.
Oh, wow. I eat based on the
Validation.
likes. Yeah.
It's validation or nothing,
Exactly.
baby.
Good. And then sit up a little. Rotate away from me a little. Yep, good. Keep the hand
And don't
underneath
forget to
those. Those are-
subscribe either, guys,
Good,
if you want more of these.
And reach that neck out a little bit. Nice, 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 nice. That's great. And then tilt the top of the head to me just a little. Good. And turn that way just a little bit. Good, perfect. Good, and then drop that hand for me. Great. Cool. So, the thing about lighting is it really is, you block light where you want it. You put light where you want it and you block it where you don't. That's kind of really foundationally all that we're doing here. The trick is kind of knowing what you want. That's always the struggle of this. So I'm going to kind of put a couple of these up here. And basically, these are all tools for controlling and restricting light. And grids in all different kinds of forms, both the hard light versions, the soft modifier versions. They are really all just about how we can control. And you can see how putting white bounce boards everywhere and really trying to make this difficult for myself and not using too much of an imprint in the floor, you can still get really beautiful results with a lot of light. It's awkward for everybody, but it's possible. And you shouldn't necessarily feel like you're limited by the space you have. I mean, if you go look at, Karsh's a great example of this, go look at, he was doing these environmental portraits in these people's rooms. There wasn't necessarily a lot of space for these things to be set up in, and still working with multiple lights, you can get these really great results with either very little light or just controlling many lights very, very specifically. So I think we have just time for maybe a couple of questions, if you guys or
I think
you have questions there.
there's one that says, is bouncing a bare bulb into the shadows better to go with option than an XL umbrella with a diffusion for fill? So I guess bouncer umbrella.
So when it comes to, most things, better or worse is always relative. It's really what you like. There have been styles that have kind of come in and out of fashion. You go look at photography from 50, 60 years ago, and it was lots of hard light everywhere, and that's just what was used. And then if you look at most of what was being used, but like a lot of soft light has been very popular for the last 20 years or so. So it's not that one is better or worse. It is always about what your preference is. And you can get great results with each. It's just a matter of what you decide to lean into and what works most effectively for what you are needing to achieve. The thing that you want to remember is that it's not I don't like to think about lighting as this formula that I need to adhere to whenever I approach any given project. I don't go in with an idea of saying, hey, this is what I have to use. I want to use what's right for the situation at hand and what's right for the subject. If I'm photographing a person, what's right for them. So what they look like, what they're wearing, all of these things factor into my modifier choice, the lighting that I use, the lens choice that I use. And that's oftentimes a bit of an organic kind of process that we're working together to figure out. You want to come in with your knowledge and a rough idea. You don't want to go in completely blind and not really have a sense of what you're going to do, but you also need to be receptive to those improvisations that are going to get you to a place that is a better version of the image than this really specific formula that you think you might need to use. That's kind of my best advice for that. Yes?
Question.
Sure.
Not to nitpick, the images are beautiful, but the image on the right, what do you think is causing that shadow?
Oh, it's because I was using a hard light.
Is it the
It's because on one of the last ones, it's the fill. Yes. Yeah. It's actually, I think it's the top of his head. That's how, because it's a higher light. And I was just, when I was moving around, it wasn't totally behind him in some of the shots. So that was just, and that's the trade-off is I do sometimes like to use a hard fill because it's a really unique aesthetic. And I think oftentimes people are scared of using it. but I like it. I use it quite a bit because it speaks to that. It's a specific visual quality that I like, and you know, sometimes run into a quirky little shadow. Now, in an ideal world, in my perfect situation, I'm in a bigger space, and if I can get honestly another foot of him off the background, you're not going to get it. So, you know, just a little bit of a trade-off in the space. Yeah. Cool. All right. Great. Then I would like to thank Fujifilm for having me out here today, as well as Adorama and Profoto for coming out and support. Thank you all for coming here as well. Chris, thank you very much. And yeah. There you go.
For all you in the chat, don't forget to hit like, subscribe. This is a new channel. If you think it's subscribed, you're probably not. And we'll get Chris back here for some more stuff. He's not done. Don't worry. He's local, sort of. Don't worry, guys. All right. Thanks for joining us. Later, guys.
Thanks so much, guys.